It's not that. Good morning. Either falls. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Regarding the team formation, are you all part of the team? I had a few emails that you wanted to change, or you already formed the team. You can make your own team. However, if you leave the team, then be sure there's somebody replace your position. All right, and be sure everyone has a 4-member team with 1 or 2 member must be either CE, ME, or NE. Right. If you meet the requirement, then you can change, you can form your own team. But when you leave the team, be sure you have a replacement for your position. Okay. And when you change the rule, the team, please let me know, because the sheet in your in the MOSFET, that will be my grading sheet. All right. So I wanted to make sure that you are in the right team. And other than that, today's speaker is Dr. Jim Maher. He's a geotechnical engineering professor. He has over many years of experience, and he's a perfect speaker for today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sato. For the bridge competition, we are selling fiber-reinforced spaghetti. So just get a hold of me after the class, and we'll see what we can do. It's going to cost a little bit. Okay, it's about $10 a stick, but we think you'll do really well in the class. I first started out here a long time ago. I went to school here between 1962 and 1967. And after that point in time, I went on and got my PhD at the University of Illinois. The education that you'll receive here at Idaho State, irrespective of what particular area of emphasis you have in this college, is outstanding. I was at the University of Illinois for 20 years. I taught in the geology department and in the civil engineering department. The students here and the professors here are outstanding. You're going to get a really good education. Take advantage of it. And do your best. Get the most out of your classes. These kind of classes, I think, are important because what you're going to end up doing is you're going to decide on a career. That decision is going to be very important to your future. Future of engineering, in particular civil engineering, is outstanding. Right now, on the books, there's about $100 billion worth of underground construction. And the job opportunities are tremendous. And it's not only true for people that are in civil engineering, but in mechanical and electrical engineering. On some of the jobs that I work on, the operation of the equipment is done by mechanical engineers. On $300 million tunneling projects, the people that are driving the machines are mechanical engineers. You have electrical engineers on the job doing the ventilation and the lighting and all of the equipment that's associated with the tunnel boring machines. I came back to Idaho State University in 2003. And since 1972, up to the present day, I have my own engineering consulting practice. I've been doing underground construction, slope stability analyses, working on actual projects for 40 years. And so I have a fairly good understanding as to what civil engineering means and what engineering geology means. Do you know that Idaho State University is one of 2 schools in the U.S. that teaches engineering geology, underground construction, and rock engineering? The other one is the University of Texas. There are only 2 in this country. Hopefully, you know, if you are interested in this area, the area of the underground, the area of construction, the area of civil engineering or mechanical or electrical, and want to apply that information to your own professional practice, you have an opportunity here. An opportunity that very few people in the country have. This is a very strong program. One of the things I'm going to talk about today is really the role of civil engineering in your life and in other people's lives. What you have to understand is that you've embarked on a career that has a tremendous level of responsibility. Don't take your classes lightly. You want to always strive to get 100%. Why? I've worked on jobs, say for example in California on the East Side Reservoir. It's a 300-foot high dam. It's going to be the water supply, one of the major water supplies for Southern California. The dam is sitting above the town of Hemet, California. There are 50,000 people in that town. What are the tolerances for being wrong? None. You can't afford to make mistakes. And you have to start developing this thinking now, okay, in your career. Obviously, everybody makes mistakes. But you have to be able to realize what those mistakes are, and you have to self-evaluate and judge all the time. That particular dam is 5 miles from the San Andreas Fault. The responsibility and the engineering that are involved in that project are tremendous. Take your engineering practice very seriously. Also apply it in your own life. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we do in geotechnical engineering. Geotechnical engineering requires a lot of art and experience, which is one of the reasons why I work in this profession. I also teach it, and I teach from the projects that I end up working on. This is a particular project in Illinois. And at some point in time, probably not now, but at some point in time you may end up building your house. Where you build is going to be important. A lot of people think, you know, the best place I can build is on a hillside because the view is tremendous. That's what these people thought, okay? Believe it or not, these are wild horses in Illinois that are running through this valley. It is absolutely a beautiful area. A subdivision was developed. A subdivision much like the subdivisions here. This is on the cul-de-sac, one of the homes, okay, that was built. This home cost about $180,000, okay, in Illinois. It's located close to Peoria, Illinois. Have any of you ever been to Illinois? One of the most impressive things about Illinois is that if you're into skiing, you have to go to the overpasses because the area is so flat. When they cut the corn down, it really gets flat. And so you don't think about landslides. In fact, these people, when they built their homes, okay, and made that investment, they weren't thinking about landslides. They were thinking about schools, and they were thinking about churches, and they were thinking about family, and they were thinking about views. They were thinking about how are we going to pay for this? And not thinking about the consequences of building on a hillside. Now, don't get me wrong. It's okay to build on a hillside. It's okay to build at the top of a hill. But it's not okay to build on a previous landslide. So how do we recognize landslides in our professional practice? How do we keep people from building in the wrong location? Are there landslides in Pocatello? Sure, of course there are. Have people built on those landslides? Sure. Why is it? Why? Because they don't recognize the symptoms that are associated with past movements during geologic time. That's what these courses are all about. is to teach you and instruct you, not only with respect to your own professional practice, but the things that you want to look for in your own personal life. This is a consequence of the landslide. This occurred in the springtime, which is when they normally take place. One of the things that you'll notice is that we have a vertical face of soil. This is a 2-foot offset in the hill slope. The ground failure goes all the way around to the structure, goes down this block wall, and manifests itself in the southwest corner of the building. At this particular time, I was working for the Illinois Department of Mines and Minerals as a consultant. And one of the tasks of the Illinois Department of Mines and Minerals, the Abandoned Mine Lands Reclamation Council, is to help people in these kind of situations. Prior to 1980, there was no insurance. There is no insurance in Idaho, okay, for building on landslides. So you're stuck. Fortunately, we were able, through the state, to go in and work on this project and save these houses. If you think about it, what is one of the biggest investments in your life or in your parents' life? It's their house. Social Security is, you know, for you guys out there, is going to be a real challenge, okay? And so it's a major investment, and you pretty much pay for it all of your life. This is a close-up of that wall. That wall has moved downslope about 1.5 feet. It's opened up. The section of the house right here is operating in cantilever. It has no support other than the temporary support that was placed in order to hold the superstructure up. We were charged with designing that temporary support. That's a structural engineering problem. It was also a problem in terms of placement of the support so that it didn't start to move in the landslide. Obviously, if I went and I put vertical posts in here on a floor slab that's moving down slope, it's going to do no good. Why? It is going to take off with the landslide. So what we ended up doing was we ended up designing a system of bracing that included rakers that was outside the zone of movement. This is in the front. And what happens with a lot of structures is that even though you're outside the area of movement, this chimney is outside where the landslide was. But as the structure operated in cantilever, what happened was the downslope side moved down. What happened to the back side of the structure? If the downslope movement is moving down, it's moving up. That's what this crack is in the chimney right here. It's not necessarily confined to the area of movement. This is 2 days later. Okay? That scarp is about 3 feet high. And one of the detrimental impacts of that scarp, of course, is that when it rains, the water comes off of the street and off of the front yards, flows down the slope, moves right down into the crack. One of the key mechanisms with respect to hill slope movement is the presence of water. And so if you're in a situation where you have your own home and you opt to work on place it on a hillside, one of the things you want to do is you want to control where the water ends up discharging. Because that water ends up flowing through the crack, down the slope, saturates the toe, and allows the displacement to continue to occur. Now, obviously, in this situation, how do we repair that crack? Obviously, we've reached the point where the only viable solution is to move the house. Now, the difficulty was that these people were living in the house. And ultimately what happened was the houses had to be condemned because it was clearly a safety issue with respect to somebody staying in that house. The problem with landslides is there our inability to predict what the nature of the movement, how much movement is going to take place. This is a situation during a heavy rainstorm to where the whole thing could have slid out and gone down slope. This is the movement that is associated with that 2-day time period, okay? Now, obviously, we've ended up dropping down and moving out substantially. Here is the bracing system that was put underneath the floor joist. This is a beam and this is a raker. The raker goes back behind the zone of movement. Now, the problem, of course, is that we've relieved and we've allowed movement to take place at the top of the slope. Is there any guarantee that it's not going to move further back up on the slope? No, there is no guarantee. And at this point in time, the decision was to move the people out of the house. This is the downslope area of movement. You can see the cracks in the basement floor. These are the rakers that we ended up designing, okay, as part of the support system. That was paid by the state in order to protect these people's houses. Absolutely, the foundation is gone. But can we save and can we support the superstructure and then move the house to another location? Now, obviously, you can't go in and move the house while the landslide is taking place, okay? It represents a really dangerous situation. And so what we did was we monitored the movement. Fortunately, toward the end of the summer, we ended up going into a dry season. Once the dry season occurred and there was no additional infiltration along the crack, then we were able to move the house. This was a critical decision. It got so bad that we actually needed a plank. You couldn't get up over this crack. This crack right here is about 3 feet wide. Okay, so we had to develop a plank in order to be able to just walk up the slope. The house that I showed previously is not the only one that's being affected. Okay, there were actually 3 houses that were affected with respect to these movements. Every one of them had a walkout basement. An absolutely beautiful setting. Nobody had any clue, okay, that this was a past landslide. Yet, if you looked at the geologic details of the slope, there was evidence of past landslide movement, and we'll talk about this. Place is trashed. The bottom is completely trashed. This is the inside of the house. This is what we were attempting to save. And obviously, even though we put the raking system in and we put the beams in, we're not able to completely stop the movement. So this is in the living room. And you can see these sets of cracks. Obviously, this wall has come down. It has created this diagonal crack here. This is an extension or a moment crack as we've had rigid body rotation. On the back side, we ended up designing and working on this frame, okay, that was placed. The insulation that was installed is because of the weather that was getting in. This crack right here is open about 4 inches. You can imagine this happening to your own house. What do we look for? What do I want you to observe or take a look at when you build your own house? Particularly if you build your own house on a hillside. One of the most important things is the irregularity of the ground surface. Normally in landslides, down at the toe of the slope, what you'll find is a very irregular topography. Most slopes don't look like this unless they've had past hill slope movements. So you'll see a series of ridges and valleys in the toe of the slope. One of the key indicators. Most slopes, if you look at them, most slopes are fairly uniform going down. But what happens when you have a landslide is the material moves down slope, it undergoes compression where it hits the other side of the valley and ridges up. And in that process, you create what is called hummocky topography. H-U-M-M-I-C-K-Y. Hummocky topography. And so that's what you want to look for. Another good indication, springs. Areas where the groundwater table intercepts the land surface, and you have ponding or flowing of water. Obviously, the water ends up infiltrating in the high areas, flows down through the slopes, and emerges down at the toe where the stream is. If you have had conditions of past landslides, what you'll find is you'll find springs. And oftentimes, you'll have water pressures that develop which are significantly high enough to where you have quicksand or quick conditions. And what you'll do is you'll go out and walk out on the slope, and all of a sudden you'll sink about knee-deep or hip-deep into the material. It's a very, very good indication of past landslide activity. Another thing you want to look at are the trees. Are the trees bent over? Okay? Trees grow vertically. Okay? In that process, what will happen is the trees will end up leaning over as a result of the movement, or what happens is they're U-shaped. Okay? They start out at the bottom, they're U-shaped, and then they end up growing vertically. It's a very, very good indication that you have creep on the hillside. Another thing you look for are scarps. What do I mean by scarps? Those are those exposures of soil at the top of the slope that indicate past movement. So you look for ground cracks in the slope. Most cracks in most soils, if it's related to drying, have a polygonal pattern, which means that they're in all sorts of different orientations, probably about 5 sides, kind of like a polygon, a polygonal pattern. But if they're linear, if they're persistent, if they're going across parallel with the slope, in all probability, you have encountered a past landslide. There was plenty of evidence in this area of past landslides. If you looked outside of the area where the homes had been built, what you would have seen would have been regular slopes. Now think about it. Who's responsible? From an ethical standpoint, who is responsible for this situation? How do these sorts of things happen? Well, number one, okay, we have somebody that develops the area. It's called the developer. The developer will hire a local engineering consulting firm that will do a site grading plan. And that site grading plan then is submitted to the city or the county for approval. And the county or the city has their own engineers who go through and evaluate whether or not that site plan is acceptable. And so we have 3 layers that ultimately end up attempting to protect the homeowner. I mean, part of it is the process of protection. There were 3 groups of people that looked at this, and nobody drew the conclusion that this particular subdivision was built in an area of past landslides, and the past landslides were fairly recent. So who does the homeowner go against, okay, in the recovery? The homeowners in this situation ended up suing the developer, they sued the engineering consulting firm, and they ended up suing the city. What was the engineers and the cities and the developers' defense? Complete act of God. Okay? And so they were looking at a situation where their intention was not to pay. They felt sorry for the homeowner. They won the lawsuit. The city and the engineer won the lawsuit. Why? Because the people could not afford to pay a consultant to come in and testify on their behalf. Well, Dr. Maher, why didn't you go and help them? Okay. I couldn't because I was working for the state that went in and did the support for the structures. They could not afford to have an independent consultant come in and take a look at this. And so their position was, well, because of the tree coverage and because of the difficulty in identifying these features, it was unknown when the developer went in and developed the land site. That didn't help the people. That did not help the people. And so be very careful, okay, in terms of picking and opting to locate where your structure is. This is down by the valley, the bottom of the valley. And you'll notice the ridges and the valleys, okay, that are present in this area, and how the toe has really bulged. It's really bulged as a result of the material moving down slope. Also, what's this right here? That exposure of soil. It's an SCARP. It's called a scarp. Okay? That's one of the things that you end up looking for in this process. Down at the toe of the slope, the material is mud. Best way to describe it. Okay? This is a spring. This is groundwater that's coming out of the slope. Okay? As a result of saturation. What happens in these instances is that the toe of the slope becomes fully saturated. It becomes a liquid. And it really ends up flowing away from the other section of the slope. In the upper portion of the slope, it pretty much is more solid material. But at the toe actually ends up flowing or moving out. So in the correction process, what do? We drain the toe. We make sure that the water does not accumulate in the toe of the slope by providing an excavated area in which we put filter fabric and we put rock, heavy rock, in order to provide a buttress and also to drain the toe. Another thing we can do is we can drill holes into the slope and put quasi-wells in that then allow the water to dissipate or to flow out without saturating the soil. Another thing we end up doing is making sure that our downspouts and so forth discharge all the way down the slope. And these houses that were built up on the slope, they did not take the water from the roof and from the street and take it all the way down to the stream. You wanted to have piping that takes it all the way down to the stream. And the key is to keep the water from saturating the soil. It doesn't rain in Pocatello. Dr. Maher, it doesn't rain in Pocatello. Why do we have a concern for landslides? Well, there's two reasons. One is during the springtime, of course, we have snow melt and we have water inflow. The second thing is, was anybody here this summer? Do you remember what happened when was it? It was August, I think it was in July. Okay, we had that big rainstorm, okay, that ended up closing South 5th, I think, in that trailer park area. We have these tremendous downpours. And we can have 3 to 5 inches of rain, okay, that occur in any period of time. A lot of it occurs as runoff. But if you can imagine, if you have open cracks in the slope, what's going to happen is those materials, that water is going to go into those cracks. And it may take a little bit, okay, to emerge down at the toe to create the flow, depending upon the permeability or the ability of the soil to transmit water. But it'll ultimately end up getting down there. Another very, very good example of a pressure ridge as a result of the upper portion of the slope pushing against the lower portion of the slope. What do you think about that tree? Is that an abnormal tree? okay? That tree is listing probably about 20 degrees downslope, okay? Another key aspect with respect to slope stability. This is my daughter, okay? One of the advantages of having my own firm was the fact that I could hire my kids, okay, to help me in the field. And so this is not a rabbit hole, okay? This is a hole that developed because sand, in response to groundwater flow, actually flowed out and created a hole in the hillside, another source of water and another source of movement, okay? It's called a piping condition. Now, the reason that she's looking down that hole so intently is because I asked her to go down and check it out for me. That never happened, okay? She told me to get lost, okay? Like, there she is, okay? She tried, okay, it didn't really work out very well, so she didn't go down. But there was sand in there, and there was other holes that developed in the slope that were associated with this piping condition. Another thing you want to do, okay, is to look in the stream valley. And if there are exposures of shale or weak material, that material right there is a shale. It's broken down into a very soft clay. That clay has a very low friction value. And the landslide is really taking place in the material which is slope wash or colluvial material above this clay layer that's sitting on bedrock. Okay, that is bedrock, but it's a poor example of bedrock. So go down in the valleys, okay, take a look at the material at the bottom. See whether or not there's this sticky clay. If there's sticky clay down there, okay, and that is you put your finger in it, okay, and you can't get it off your finger, sticky clay, that is another indication of an area where you have potential for a landslide. We spent a lot of time at this site. And one of the things that we ended up doing was we drilled and we instrumented the site. This is a drilling rig. This is part of geotechnical engineering practice. What we've used is an auger in order to advance the hole into the subsurface. We are installing observation wells and inclinometers in order to measure the slope movement so that we could determine the best time in order to relocate the houses. This particular drilling rig is on the landslide itself. This is a soil sample that we collected from the hole. That soil sample is in the area where sliding took place. And in geotechnical engineering practice, what we do is we take that material into the laboratory and we perform tests in order to determine how strong and how resistant it is to sliding. And therefore, we are able to come up with a suitable design as far as stabilizing the slope. That's the whole intent. This is the shale, okay, which was down below the landslide. Landslide is taking place between the soil up above and this shale down below, okay? So what we identified was the zone of movement. The shale was weathered. This brown that you see right here, okay, is weathering that has occurred during geologic time. You know, it's expensive. If you were to go, let's say, and you were want to drill or want to place your house up Buckskin Road, beautiful area, right? And you had a 5-acre site. Would it be worthwhile to hire someone locally that does geological engineering to drill some holes to find out what's there? Think about it. You know, a lot of these investigations cost about $2,000. Pretty good number, okay? You're building a $200,000 house, okay? It's small potatoes to get a professional opinion. If you don't feel comfortable after 4 years here rendering your own professional opinions, get somebody that can, okay? Now in the city of Pocatello, it's mandated that a geotechnical investigation be carried out. And a report has to be submitted with respect to the conditions that can occur and the possibility for landslides. I won't go through these. These are, again, soil samples, okay, that were taken from these holes. Anybody recognize the scene?
How deep do you take your soil samples at?
How deep? What was the question?
Yeah, how deep are you taking your, with your drill rig, are you taking your soil samples?
What we did was we took soil samples deep enough to where we got into and were comfortable with identifying undisturbed material. And so if I go back to this particular core box section, we're down about 70 feet. The area that we're in has horizontally bedded shales, okay, which means that the bedding planes are horizontal. If I look at this seam right here, it's all horizontal. This is below the disturbed zone. Most failures that occur will occur in the soil and not necessarily in the rock. But I have to know what the geology is to make a determination that I'm in fact in undisturbed material. It's a very good question. Follow up? This material right here, that's disturbed. Okay? That's granulated and crushed. This is in the area where the failure occurred. Okay? This is in the weathered shale, the broken shale. What has caused the breakage has been the hill slope movements. Remember, we are drilling in a landslide. This is in the upper part of the profile, where the material is essentially moving en masse and not differentially across the failure surface. Anybody recognize this photograph? This photograph is from an old Tom Mix movie. Okay, that's before we had sound, okay, in movies. It's in an area of Hagerman, okay, Idaho. Some of the largest landslides in the world, right here in your own backyard. If you look at the area, what you'll notice is that the hillsides are very dry, okay? They're spotted with sagebrush and what very little vegetation can grow, but down in this area right here, we have a plethora of really good vegetation, sound vegetation. What does the vegetation need? It needs water, okay? So this is where it ends up emerging from the hill slope. What would be the source of water? It's all the irrigation that has taken place on the upper part of the plateau. Okay, all of this is irrigation. There's canals. There are both ditch as well as piping irrigation sprinkler systems. And what's happening is it's emerging in this area of where springs and so forth have developed. And actually there is flow that occurs down into the Snake River. This is a location where there is a mud flow. What I'm looking at is soil that is fully saturated, that has flowed as a viscous fluid down the slope. If you were to step off into that, okay, all I can say is you want to be on a big horse, because that is deep and you'll keep going, okay? That material is very liquefied. One of the things I want to give you in this, okay, is think very carefully, okay, about your career here, about where you're going, and apply it in your own life. Take an inventory, okay, of what's going on. Keep track of how well you do. When you get an exam back, don't be looking for extra points, okay? Don't waste your time. The reality is that the grades that you end up getting here are going to have very little impact on your professional career. They may as far as your initial job is concerned, but it's what you learn. You've got to go out and you've got to apply this education. Your first job, okay, you go to, and they hand you a project, they're not going to ask you what grade you got, okay? You want to prepare yourself to where your employer gives you a project and you know what to do and you know how to do it. And you're not so insecure that you're afraid to go to your employer and ask for help. And you end up doing your best. Because that's what this is all about. What it's all about is applying your education and being successful in your professional practice. Don't complain about getting extra assignments at the last hour, okay? That's going to happen. Relish the opportunity to get as much information out of your professors as you possibly can. These people are experts in their field. Dr. Sato is a well-renowned engineer and scientist in environmental engineering. He can teach you things. Ask questions. You're paying a fortune for this education. Spend the necessary time to get the most out of it. You aren't here to get grades, okay? You're here to learn. And that learning process is going to go on for a long time. I've been doing these type of studies for 40 years. And I'm still learning today. And I will continue to learn as long as my professional practice goes on, and they end up burying me with my last dime. Are there any questions? Thank you so much. It's a really exciting career. Do your best. Do your very best.